Okay, so are we ready? Great. Ahi Gvirtsman from Spyre, the author of the Peak Innovation Principles, co-founder of Spyre and an innovation thought leader, will close this great day with a super interesting and innovative talk about the adoption of an entrepreneur and agile mindset at the product level. Achi will say it better than me. Come on, this word, entrepreneur. Okay, Achi, thank
All right.
you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. So your R&D is agile, but what about your product? So I'm going to start just with a bit of an introduction of what is the motivation for today's talk. But I promise you that by the end of this talk, I will have given you a few tools that you can start applying yourselves tomorrow morning. Usually when we look at standard product development processes, and my biggest experience came from working inside established organizations. If you work for a startup, then once the startup reaches a certain size, then this applies to you as well. You get to a point where there's a team of product managers, decision makers that create a business plan. The business plan is transferred to start building as a proof of concept, and then it goes to some sort of a pilot or an alpha or a beta. Each organization has its own sort of process. However, the thing here is that over time, agile development methods started appearing in areas where we start to actually build something. And I read in the principles of agile that working code is considered progress. And the thing is that when you look at the teams that define what is going to go into a product, that process today is still usually waterfall. Because you could tell me, Achi, in Agile, we are also able to shift certain things inside the product, and I agree, I know that you can. But can you, inside the R&D, decide that instead of selling cats, you're going to start selling dogs? So that probably is not the case in established organizations, even if the R&D works based on Agile. And what that means is that the R&D can be agile, but the decisions about the product, about what the R&D is expected to build, the value that the company is expected to deliver to its customers through its software, that is still being decided using waterfall methods. And the thing that we should aspire to in an ideal world, and as I said earlier, startups in their early stages do work this way, the ones that are working using methodologies such as lean startup, they do very quick iterations. So we want to get to a point where all of our process, the product decisions and the development are all agile, having the ability to build, measure, learn, having the ability to cycle very quickly through options and decide which ones are the best. The problem is that even startups that work this way, at some point, quote unquote, mature into responsible standard organizations with hierarchies and functions that are experts, and each team has its own specific goals. And then what happens is you start building silos and you start separating between the R&D that can still stay very agile and the rest of the business processes that become over time more and more waterfall. Now, this is the introduction, okay? So why am I here, okay? Why is this important? Well, I'm going to give you a case study that is very well known of Netflix and Blockbuster, but there's a caveat at the end that will make it a bit fresher. So those of you who are not familiar, Netflix in 2000, when they just started, they went to the CEO of Blockbuster, who were the dominant force at the time, and they offered them to purchase Netflix for $50 million. That did not turn out very well. The CEO of Blockbuster, according to the founders of Netflix, was holding back his laughter at the time when they were meeting him. But if you fast forward 10 years later, what happened was that Blockbuster went bankrupt. In 2006, Netflix went over $1 billion in revenues for the first time. So you could say that only in 2006 could Blockbuster identify that Netflix was a true threat to them. and 4 years later, they went bankrupt. So think about yourselves in your corresponding organizations where you work today. And think about the disrupting force that will arrive at some point, because it will. Because one thing that we know today is that whatever business you're in, somebody is in the process of disrupting you in the next few years. There's always the next disruption wave. So if you know that from the moment that you can identify that you're being disrupted until it's too late to do anything, mainly from 2006 to 2010, if I put you in a time machine and I sent you back to, let's say, 2005, and I told you that there is a company that's going to disrupt you, but you don't know where that disruption is going to come from, what would you do? So the answer is you would probably start trying a lot of things until some of them would be successful and will allow you to grow or to avoid the disruption. You would build this muscle of the ability to actually become more agile, right? Because there is no certainty when you try to innovate. If Blockbuster had tried to reinvent itself in 2005, it's not like they could follow some waterfall magical process that would have given them the correct answer. And I would put it to you, then even if they had brought in Steve Jobs to their board and he would have told them what they should do, they wouldn't have done it. So the question is, how can we change organizations to make them more agile, not just at the R&D level, but at the product level, at the value offering level, so that they're able to withstand the test of time and that they're able to withstand the onslaught of disruptions that are the reality of today. So I don't know what generations you guys belong to, but this is a game from my childhood. It's called Lemmings. If you're not familiar, I highly recommend it. So you see these little characters, they drop from the sky and they start walking aimlessly forward. And at the end, they fall into a pit or to some other terrible ending. And the job of the player is to build some sort of bridge or something that will get them safely to the other side. So you see the arrow here. This is me 20 years ago. I was working for an international corporation called HP Software, and I was trying to innovate. I was trying to build products that will be the future of HP Software. And alongside me were quite a few other ambitious people who were trying to build solutions and products themselves. And we would simply look like these little creatures. We would walk forward until we fell into some sort of pit, and then we would go back to the beginning and try again. And at some point, I stopped and I said, something's wrong here. It can't be that we're all failing because we're stupid or incompetent. Something has to be done at the fundamental system level. And so what I did was I decided that I wanted to build a mechanism, I wanted to build a solution that will help people who are in this position, who are trying to change the business of their organization, would help them be successful doing that. And so, as I was introduced, my name is Ahi Gvirtsman, and my background includes building and running the Global Innovation Program of HP Software for 7 years. My partners and I at Spyre Group have since then worked with hundreds of organizations on their innovation programs and innovation activities in the purpose of creating tangible, measurable outcomes. We mentored thousands of startups and corporate ventures in order to develop, as we were developing a methodology that will actually make this a possibility. And my purpose today is, I thought long and hard, what could be an interesting topic for a forum like this of people who work and are passionate about Agile. And what I wanted to do was, I wanted to share with you today, besides the fact that Agile is great and important at the product level, not just at the R&D level, I want to give you the tools and the understanding of what is the right path for you if you have an idea that could change your company's business, could change the product at the fundamental level, could perhaps offer to sell dogs instead of selling cats. What should you do unless you work in a startup with 20 people where everybody's doing everything? If you're working with in a company that has teams that are dedicated to product, to marketing, to R&D, then that is an organization where you need to start developing a skill if you want to offer something like this and have a real chance of it becoming reality. And what I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes is based on my partners and my professional experience working with many different organizations in many different sectors. All right. So let's say that you have an idea that could impact the business. The conventional wisdom says if you really believe in yourself and your idea, and you work on it with enough passion and conviction, then you'll get organizations to implement it to success. And there's a great story about the Post-it note. If you're not familiar, I encourage you to Google it, because it is a very nice story about what is called skunkworks innovation that turned out into something that's very successful. However, reality is a bit different, I'm afraid. And when you look at the case studies that you read about in business publications, they usually focus on the heroic stories of success. But the truth is that there's much, much more failure than success in the corporate world when employees try to innovate by introducing an idea that could impact the business beyond the confines of simply creating better code or creating a better user interface or introducing a feature that could be very successful with the existing customer base and the overall existing offering that already exists within the organization. If you try to wander beyond that, there's a lot of failure there that you're not going to read about. And there are lots of reasons why you'll fail, right? So your direct manager maybe doesn't like you working on side projects that are not related directly to your responsibilities, or you don't have access to decision makers. Think about an organization of 5,000 people that is distributed globally. How are you going to find the right executive to talk to? You're going to hear, we've tried it before and it failed. This organization will never complete the sentence, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of reasons why you'll fail. And what happens is that you have these creative thinking seminars, or you have a hackathon, and the winners make it into the quote unquote backlog, which we all know is infinite. And making it into the backlog is not a great achievement. You need to make it above the red line. The judging panel loves an idea, but decides that it's just too much right now in a hackathon. So the question is, what can you do as an employee in a corporation that would like to see something that is beyond the confines of R&D? What can you do? So how can we promote product level ideas effectively in an established organization? Essentially saying, how can we try more stuff, not just at the R&D level, but at the product level, and that way be able to iterate more quickly and introduce the agile mindset, not just to writing code, but to also thinking about the product. So my first message to you is that innovation is a skill. If you're going to step into this adventure, and it is an adventure, I don't have no doubt about it. I have a VP of innovation of a very successful company here in Israel, a food manufacturing company, who likes to say that innovation is not for the weak. Okay, so if you want to promote something, you have to be very passionate about it. You're going to need a lot of energy and perseverance, and you need the skill. If you're going to fly a plane, then you need the instruction manual for the plane. If you're going to try to innovate, then you better know what you're doing, because you have this wall that exists between the area of the company that works on what we're going to do and the area of the company that talks about how we're going to do it. And in order to break through this wall, you need to have the right set of skills. So first of all, let's talk about the idea. The first thing that I highly recommend for you is to share and iterate. Harness the intellect and experience of people you trust and earn their support. You're going to say, why should I share an idea? Sometimes people will tell me I'm a lone wolf type. And to that, I say that additional minds are additional perspectives. It's unforeseen roadblocks that you can see early on. And you're going to think about more solutions. Secondly, they'll just say, I can't, right? So people would like to work what is called skunkworks, as I said before. Sometimes there's a legend, right, in the company about somebody who likes to do stuff under the radar and then surprise the management team with the results. So that also is something that you could do. Sometimes it could work, but I recommend that you actually face the people who will say that you can't and ask them what has to happen for you to say yes. And I've seen cases where projects that were very, very problematic, where people were resisting, because sometimes it's because that they go against regulation. Sometimes it's really different from what the organization is used to doing. So based on our guidance, they went to the people who are the ones who are blocking them and had a conversation. about what needs to happen for them to say yes, and that allows them to make progress. So don't hide from the blockers of the organization. Talk to them and find creative ways of how that could actually work. And very important, focus on these people's domain expertise. Don't ask them if they like your idea, because it's not relevant. If I talk to somebody from the legal department, I ask them about the legal aspects of the idea. If I talk to somebody who has technical expertise that I don't have, I ask them about their technical expertise. With regards to whether the idea will be successful or not, since we are talking about innovation, we're talking about high risk, high reward opportunities, let me prove that I'm right. And the resistance that you get now you may also get from the management later. So if you circulate your idea, if you talk to the detractors now and you're not afraid of having this conversation, then later on, if management also has similar things to say, then you will already have the right answers. Another thing that people are afraid is that somebody might steal my idea, right? And the truth is that unless you're talking about a patent that somebody might steal from you, and that's rarely the case, if your idea can be stolen, then it wasn't truly innovative. That's my perspective. Because when you have an innovative idea, it means that you see something that other people don't. And I assure you that even if you explain to people what your idea is about, they'll see a different thing. One of the skills that entrepreneurs, here I said the word, I'll say it again, intrapreneurs have to develop is the ability to communicate their idea effectively. So I can tell you it's very, very rare that somebody would actually really steal an idea. And another thing that you have to remember is that innovation is an extreme team sport. It's not something that you can do alone. And if you bring more people in, then it really raises the probability that you're successful. After you circulate your idea, I want to talk about something that we at Spyre call initial validation. Initial validation, in your case, when you are trying to promote an idea that is challenging, that is beyond the scope of what R&D usually does, that is beyond the scope of the traditional hackathon, something that could actually have business implications, product level implications, portfolio level implications. One of the key things, if you want management to trust you, you have to tell them something that they don't already know. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. Think about it for a second. You need to tell your management team something that they don't already know. All right. So why? Because facts beat opinions 9 times out of 10. If you pitch to your management team and you tell them, I think that our company should develop a search engine, and they're going to say, well, we think differently, then the conversation is over, right? Because if I'm an average employee in a corporation, my opinion is interesting, but it could be completely irrelevant, right? So it's not enough for me to say, I believe that we should do this and talk about it very passionately. I have to find things that my management team doesn't know, and I have to make myself interesting as a speaker, as somebody who pushes an idea forward. When we talk to the management team, we have to be ready, right? We cannot present ideas to the management team too soon. I like to use the Greek mythology story of Daedalus and Icarus, where Daedalus was a master craftsman and he was jailed in a tower with his son, Icarus, who was his apprentice. And they were very resourceful, so they created wings out of bird's feather and wax. And before they jumped to their freedom, Daedalus warned his son Icarus not to fly too close to the sun, because the heat of the sun might melt the wax and the wings will fall apart. And his son did not listen to him in this story. He flew too high and fell to his tragic end in the Aegean Sea. And what I like to say is that presenting ideas to the management team too soon is like flying too close to the sun with wings that are made of feathers and wax. And one of my instructions to companies that do hackathons is, I'd rather you didn't show the ideas to the management team at the end of the hackathon. We just wrote a few lines of code. If there are product implications, do a few steps before you expose it to the management team, because in 24 or 48 hours, it's going to be very difficult for you to build a case that is persuasive beyond something that is a feature within the confines of an existing product. So how do I get myself ready in order to tell my management things that they don't already know? So the first thing I should do is get supporting evidence. I highly recommend Lean Startup. At Spyre, we developed something that is a bit more advanced that applies to corporations. Building an innovative venture inside a corporation is different from establishing a startup. But unless you want to read my book on the topic, The Lean Startup is a great book that you could learn a lot from. You need to ask yourself, is the problem real? Will a solution be sufficient if it works? And will the impact of success justify the risk? So whatever information you can collect about that, and you can collect quite a lot of information by stepping out of the office, talking to potential customers, talking to key functions inside your organization. You can do a lot of things before writing a single line of code to justify investing in you. And remember, it's not just investing in your idea, it's investing in you. So be prepared and collect that information so that when you talk to the management team, you will be regarded as an interesting person that they want to talk to again, because you're telling them things, facts, data, opinions that you collected from the field from relevant people that can now make you more confident that your idea is the correct one. Can you describe it effectively in 10 minutes? Ask yourself, because usually people who have an idea take a very long time to explain it. They need a lot of screenshots usually because they want to show something. Remember, working code is progress. We have to set that aside for a second because here we're not talking about code. You have to focus, you have to be very succinct the way that you describe your idea, and you have to walk the management team or the decision makers that you're presenting to, you have to walk them through this and share with them the things that you've learned and why you believe that it's not just a great idea, but you have also some evidence to support your claims. Next, you need to get access. Who is the decision maker? Ask yourself, if my idea is selected and approved, who is the executive in the organization who is going to make the decision to put it into the work plan at a high enough priority so that it is built and implemented? Who is that decision maker? That's the person in the organization you need to get to eventually. And that's the person in your organization that if you get an opportunity to pitch to, you better come ready, not just with a nice story, but with some evidence, with some data to back you up. Next, what is the acceptable way of getting an audience? So every organization has different acceptable ways of getting an audience. I'll just tell you an example that clients that work with us, with Spyre, have specific meetings called the Innovation Council, where employees can pitch their ideas to the executive team at a predefined setting. But if you don't have that, most executives would love to hear interesting ideas that are presented in an effective manner. You just need to get on their calendar, on their agenda somehow. And that really is up to your entrepreneurial energy and skill and your ability to make things happen, which is also very important when you're trying to promote an idea like this. You will need to step out of your comfort zone. You will need to do things that you are not comfortable doing in the day-to-day. And that is an important aspect of, here I'm going to say it again, entrepreneurship. Who can help you get there? Sometimes your direct manager, sometimes somebody in a parallel team. Sometimes it's someone who you worked with on another project. Find a way to get to the right decision maker. The third part is asking for the right thing. And I'm going to surprise you here, okay? So usually when you want to promote an idea, you're asking for resources to build. And you could say, I want to build a prototype, or I want to build a POC, or I want to create a designed mock-up so that you can approve the next step and so on. That's an engineering mindset you're going to need to set aside for a second if you want to think like a true entrepreneur. We know that you can write code, okay? If you can imagine it, you usually can write the code. So there isn't a real question of, can you write the code? The real question is, if you write the code, is it going to generate the value that you believe that it will? Is it going to solve a real problem in the world? Will people be willing to pay you and change their behavior to use the solution that you created using this code? And in order to prove that, you don't need to write the code. If you have to write the code, in order to prove that, then you're actually running a very expensive experiment. Writing code is expensive. Resources who write code are expensive. My message to you is you need to come up with ways of running an experiment that is cheap and quick and will prove to your management team that if you write the code, then it will generate the value so that they will let you start writing the code. If you do that, so with our clients, what we say is ask for 10% of what you usually would ask for maybe a POC, for example, or a typical POC. We work with hardware companies, work with telecommunications, work with software, work with many, many different types of organizations. So each one has its own standards. We simply say ask for 10%. Why? Because management teams will find it much easier to let you have that 10% and run that experiment. What should that experiment be? Again, I refer you to a notion that's called MVP, minimum viable product. However, I would like you to think about ways of creating that MVP without the code. Okay, so for example, if you want to simulate what will happen if you add bot capabilities, I'm talking in stuff that it's arcane, I apologize, but just to give you an idea. So you could have a person mimicking a bot and conversing with customers and then surveying them for their level of satisfaction from the service. So if the bottleneck is building the bot, just pretend to be a bot for a week with certain customers and then survey them and compare that to your other customers, okay? If you think about Dropbox created a video of their service and had an ability, let people sign up for the service before they started writing the code. And they saw that they had a lot of signups, and that for them was an indication that they should create the product. So I want you to think in that way. Don't think about, I want the green light to start building. Think about it if it were your money. If you had to mortgage your house for that project, what would you prefer to know before you did that? Okay, and an experiment is a great way to do this. And you can define what you're going to measure at the end of the experiment, and you can define what should be the threshold of success and agree with your decision maker about what should be the threshold of success in order for them to fund the next part of your project. So what you're saying is you need a little money, a little work time, and a little management attention. That's all you're asking for. If you do that, you're helping them to say yes to you. Always think about that. Don't ask for too much. Promise a lot. Promise that you'll bring them certain findings that will increase their level of certainty, making a decision about the next step, and they will appreciate you. Because if you do that, they will see you as somebody who understands their world, understands how they think, and somebody that is worth listening to. And that's important because not only are you promoting the venture inside your company, your idea, remember that you're also promoting yourself. You're creating yourself as a brand inside the company. So remember that as you do this. You are also helping your career when you do this, as long as you're working responsibly. As I said, you agree on success criteria, and assuming that you hit those criteria, what the next step should be. Three most important things if I want to take away from this slide. Will the impact of success justify the risk? Who is the decision maker? And remember the concept of an experiment. It takes creativity. It really varies between industries, but I'm telling you that it works in any industry. You can come up with clever experiments that are very effective. The most common mistakes that we see from people who are thinking about innovative ideas, of ideas that could impact the company at the product level, at the portfolio level. The first one is thinking about their idea in a myopic way. So if I'm an engineer and I like to write code, I see my idea as code, right? I see the product, I see the technology. If I'm a researcher, I think about my research, and that to me is the essence of the idea instead of the value that it will generate. Or if I'm a salesperson, all I care about is something that will help me close a few more deals in the market that I'm active right now. I don't think about the company in a global sense. I don't think about the portfolio in a holistic sense. I think about the problems that I need to solve for my existing customers right now so that they will close deals with me. So that's one mistake. The second, as I said earlier, believing that your opinion matters. I know it sounds a bit sarcastic, but that's not the intention. I also say about myself, my opinion is interesting. It could be completely irrelevant. The thing about opinion is that it really depends on the people in the room. So if I'm an average employee in a company and I present to my executive team, I said earlier, it takes more than my opinion to persuade them, even if I'm very passionate. So think about how can you assure your management team that if they make a decision to invest in you, that they feel confident that they're making a good decision. And the third one is asking or taking, because sometimes management teams get very excited about something and just want to pour a lot of budget on it. So asking or taking a high budget to build something. And a word of caution to you, if you're in charge of a project and you asked for a lot of budget and you got it, or your management team offered you a lot of budget, I would think twice. I would still want to build a gradual plan. Why? Because with a high spending velocity come a lot of expectations and very little patience. So you have to remember that the more that is invested in you, the shorter the runway you're going to get for takeoff. So the experiment is just one step in a progression of ever increasing investment in something that you're working on. So remember to keep it disciplined. Don't get tempted to take too much too soon, because even for yourself, you have to be confident that what you're working on is indeed going to be successful. So build it gradually, build it in iterations. It's like building a fire. The third part is something that we at Spyre call funded validation, and that is the experiment that I mentioned earlier. And I read a book about management that had a phrase that I really liked, and it said, what do I need to do to get an A+? It isn't about the right answer. It's about the answer which is the right one right now. What I mean by that is that when you are proposing product, portfolio, strategic ideas to your company, there is no true right or wrong answers. It really is a question of influence, of changing your reality through the people who have the power to do so at that moment, right? So if your executive team at a certain moment in time is willing and able to perform a certain project, that is part of the condition to your success. So even if you bring in the greatest experts in the world that will pitch to your management team something that they don't feel confident implementing, it will not happen. So it's not just about having the correct idea, it's about influencing your executive team and getting them to trust you and to support the project. So what is the recipe for failure? Building instead of validating. Remember that validation is progress. I know that you have a lot of elements in Agile that have to do with measuring and making sure that you are creating the right software, that you're creating the right interface, optimizing. So take that same approach and apply it to your product ideas. How can you validate before you start building? How can you collect this data without building a product? By the way, you could write some software. You could have some, landing pages and all sorts of simulations of the software to show that people will want to buy it, for example, okay? I said before, agreeing to get early major funding is not a good idea, and not reporting the findings to decision makers periodically. So you have to introduce the notion that validation is progress and not be shy to update the management team from time to time about what you learn and about the progress that you're making. Just like, again, your practices of writing code today. So if I summarize what we recommend that you do when you try to promote an idea inside a corporation that has this barrier between the product decisions and the R&D that can work agile. First of all, share your idea and iterate on it. Don't fall in love with a solution. Think about the problem that you're solving and the value that you're delivering. Second, collect the supportive evidence that will help you speak in more confidence about the fact that your idea should be invested in. And then run a funded and sponsored experiment before starting to build an actual product. If you do something like that, think about what we just said. We said that in order to bring an idea to a point where the management might be willing to invest in it and bring it into the work plans, you need some time, you need some energy and enthusiasm, and you need a little bit of money and a little bit of time to run an experiment. That is something that really lowers the barrier of entry. It makes it much easier and assuming that the experiment is successful, it makes it much easier for the management team to say yes to you and to allow you to introduce your ideas into development. So the next time you have a hackathon or brainstorming, creative thinking, and an idea pops up that seems a little bit too much out of reach, a little bit outside the norm of what is acceptable in such a venue, because it's a bit too ambitious, it's a bit too impactful on the business. Instead of trying to either dismiss it or try to say, okay, let's squeeze it a little bit, let's shrink it a little bit so that it does fit into the capabilities of what we can actually promote within, say, a hackathon. Step back for a second and say, let's try thinking about this a little bit more. Let's try using the lean startup approach. Let's start documenting the assumptions of this idea. Let's try validating them. Let's ask not to build, let's ask to run an experiment. Think in an entrepreneurial way, and your chances of actually seeing an idea like that become a reality. And as a result, your company building this muscle, building this skill of assessing and actually deploying innovative ideas in a more agile way, or that affects the product itself and not just how the product is delivered, that is something that is, I believe, worth a lot to your organization. And if you do things like that, then you will really be helping the organization mature into an entity that can actually cope with the barrage of disruption that everybody is experiencing today in any industry. And so if I started with a lemming story, you can see the bridge here. And hopefully this is something that you'll be able to create, at least for yourselves in the corporation. And maybe later, who knows, create a mechanism that can be applied to your colleagues as well and to your company as a whole. I can tell you that we at Spyre have a very structured way of doing that through a process for innovative ideas, for a way of involving the decision makers in a structured way, by creating a network of information inside the organization that connects people with different areas of expertise to the entrepreneurs, so that this extreme team sport that I was talking about can actually take place inside an organization that still has silos. We don't break the organization up and rebuild it. It continues to do what it's doing, but in parallel, it is able to assess and consider far-reaching ideas that could impact the business in a significant way. So at this point, we'll conclude. You can reach out to me over LinkedIn. Here's my email address. Here's our website. We really say that it's not about ideas. It's about making ideas happen. And I really wish you a lot of success in whatever endeavor you choose to pursue. I'll be happy to take questions right now if you have any.
You can write question in the chat if you'd like. First, thank you so much, Ahi, for this inspiring talk. I took many notes out of it. I can really relate to what you said. If you can imagine it, you can write the code for it, for sure.
Yeah. I